Readers are welcome to leave comments in the comments section.
Elena Vance did not allow variables in her workspace, and Harper Wilde was a variable wrapped in tailored linen and effortless confidence. The storm outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan agency had turned the skyline into a blur of gray and neon. It was past 9 in the evening. The rest of the creative team had fled hours ago, chasing the last reliable trains out of the city before the flash floods hit. Elena, however, remained anchored to her desk, her gaze fixed on the glowing monitor. "If you stare at that slide any harder, you're going to burn a hole through the pixels," a voice drawled from the doorway. Elena didn't look up, though her posture stiffened imperceptibly. She knew the cadence of that voice all too well. Harper was leaning against the doorframe, a half-empty mug of coffee cradled in her hands. Her jacket was gone, the sleeves of her white button-down rolled up to her elbows, revealing the clean lines of her forearms. "The pitch is at 8 tomorrow morning, Harper," Elena said, her tone clipped, smooth, and entirely professional. "The client doesn't pay us millions to look at almost perfect concepts. The color palette on the third slide is still too warm." Harper walked into the office, her steps deliberate and quiet. She didn't stop at the guest chairs across the desk. Instead, she rounded the mahogany structure, invading the unspoken perimeter Elena kept around herself. She leaned down, resting one hand on the back of Elena's ergonomic chair, her other hand placing the coffee mug just inches from Elena's keyboard. "Warmth is what sells, Elena," Harper murmured, her voice dropping an octave. She leaned in closer to look at the screen, bringing with her the faint scent of rain, cedarwood, and expensive espresso. "The client wants their audience to feel something. You're giving them geometry. I'm giving them a heartbeat." Elena finally turned her head. Because of Harper's proximity, the movement brought their faces barely 5 inches apart. Elena could see the flecks of gold in Harper's amber eyes, the slight, teasing curve of her lips. The air between them instantly shifted, growing heavy, thick with a competitive friction that had been simmering since Harper joined the firm 3 months ago. Elena didn't pull back. To retreat was to lose. "A heartbeat without structure is just arrhythmia," she countered, keeping her gaze locked onto Harper's. Harper chuckled, a low, vibrant sound that vibrated straight through Elena's chest. "Always so clinical. Is that how you protect yourself?" "I don't need protection. I need results." "Let's test that theory," Harper said softly. She reached past Elena's shoulder, her arm brushing lightly against Elena's silk blouse. The brief contact sent a sharp, unexpected jolt of electricity down Elena's spine. Harper grabbed the mouse, her fingers hovering just over Elena's hand before she took control of the cursor. Elena watched Harper's profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across her forehead. The urge to reach out and tuck that hair behind Harper's ear crossed Elena's mind so vividly it alarmed her. She forced her eyes back to the screen as Harper navigated the design software. "Look," Harper said, her breath brushing against Elena's cheek as she spoke. She adjusted the saturation slider, lowering the warmth by just a fraction, finding a masterful middle ground between Elena's stark minimalism and her own vibrant expressionism. "See that? It's a compromise. We both get what we want." Elena swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. The design looked flawless. But more pressing than the design was the fact that Harper hadn't moved back. She was still hovering, her presence enveloping, her eyes shifting from the monitor down to Elena's lips, then back up to her eyes. "Is it?" Elena asked, her voice losing a bit of its icy armor, replacing it with something softer, more breathless. We'll see tomorrow, Harper whispered. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A loud crack of thunder rattled the glass windows, and the entire floor plunged into pitch darkness. The hum of the air conditioning died, leaving only the sound of the torrential rain drumming against the building. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. Well, Harper's voice broke the dark, closer now. That wasn't in the brief. The backup generators should kick in for the emergency lights in a minute, Elena said, trying to maintain her composure. She made a move to stand up, but in the dark, her knee bumped against Harper's thigh. A hand caught Elena's forearm to steady her. Harper's grip was warm, firm, and entirely lingering. The heat of her palm seeped through the thin silk of Elena's sleeve. Don't move, Harper said gently. You'll trip over the cables. I know my own office, Harper. Maybe. But you don't know where I'm standing. The sheer truth of the statement kept Elena entirely still. In the darkness, her other senses heightened. She could hear the rhythm of Harper's breathing, slightly elevated. She could feel the deliberate space Harper was occupying, closing the gap between them until their torsos almost touched. A pale, amber glow slowly filled the room as the emergency baseboard lights activated, casting long, dramatic shadows up the walls. The dim illumination didn't ruin the intimacy, it amplified it. Harper hadn't let go of Elena's arm. Her thumb made a slow, almost imperceptible brush against the inside of Elena's wrist, right over her pulsing vein. Your heart rate is up, Director, Harper teased, though the playful edge in her voice was softened by a genuine, burning curiosity. Elena looked down at the hand on her wrist, then up at Harper's face, half lit by the golden emergency lights. The professional mask she had spent years building felt incredibly fragile under Harper's steady gaze. It's just the surprise of the blackout, Elena lied smoothly. If you say so, Harper replied. She didn't let go. Instead, she stepped closer, her free hand rising to gently touch the collar of Elena's blouse, straightening a microscopic crease. The gesture was incredibly domestic, shockingly intimate, and entirely unprompted. But I think you're just afraid. Afraid of what? Elena's voice was a whisper now, the distance between them entirely gone. Of admitting that you like having me this close. The challenge hung in the air, sweet and dangerous. Elena's breath hitched. She looked at Harper's lips, full and parted slightly, inviting a reaction. Every corporate rule, every professional boundary she held dear screamed at her to step back, to reprimand Harper, to re-establish order. Instead, Elena leaned in just a fraction of an inch, her eyes darkening. And if I do? Harper's eyes widened slightly, a flash of genuine surprise crossing her features before a soft, deeply satisfied smile touched her lips. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, magnetic pull. She tilted her head, her gaze dropping to Elena's mouth, her hand moving from Elena's collar to trace the soft line of her jawline. The touch was feather-light, sending a shiver through Elena that she couldn't hide. Harper leaned in, her lips agonizingly close to Elena's ear. Then I'd say we've been wasting a lot of time talking about color palettes, Harper murmured, her breath warm against Elena's skin. Before the tension could snap, the overhead lights suddenly flashed back to life with a loud buzz. The computer monitors whirred as they rebooted, and the mundane hum of the office returned, shattering the twilight spell. Elena instantly stepped back, the sudden brightness forcing reality back into the room. She cleared her throat, adjusting her blouse, her professional posture snapping back into place like a rubber band, though her cheeks carried a faint, undeniable flush. Harper let her hands drop to her sides, a small, knowing smirk remaining on her face. She didn't look flustered at all, she looked exhilarated. "The system is rebooting," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly before she regained her trademark control. "We should save the file and leave before the roads become entirely impassable." Harper picked up her coffee mug, taking a slow sip while keeping her eyes locked on Elena. "Whatever you say, boss. But the work is done. The pitch is perfect." She walked backward toward the door, her eyes never leaving Elena's. "See you at 7:30, Elena. Wear the blue suit. It brings out the warmth in your eyes." With a wink, Harper turned and walked out into the hallway, leaving Elena standing alone in her office. Elena sat back down in her chair, her heart still hammering against her ribs. She looked at the mouse, then down at her wrist where the ghost of Harper's touch still burned. For the first time in her career, Elena wasn't thinking about the client pitch at all. She was thinking about tomorrow night. The fabric of the sapphire blue suit felt heavier than usual against Elena's skin as she stood before the full-length mirror in her apartment. It was a precise, immaculate cut, sharp shoulders, a tailored waist, a shade of blue that commanded a room without needing to shout. She told herself she chose it because the board members of Logan Holdings preferred traditional elegance. She told herself it had absolutely nothing to do with a whisper in a darkened office the night before. But as she fastened the silver watch around her wrist, her fingers lingered on the skin where Harper's thumb had rested just 12 hours ago. The phantom sensation refused to leave. By 7:15, Elena was already in the agency's central boardroom, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a panoramic view of a washed-clean Manhattan. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, unforgiving morning light. She organized the printed briefs, aligned the tablets, and checked the display connection for the third time. Every movement was calculated, a desperate attempt to build her usual fortress of control before Harper arrived. The heavy glass door swung open, the rhythmic click of heels breaking the silence. Elena did not turn around immediately. She smoothed the front of her jacket, exhaled a quiet breath, and then turned to face her art director. Harper stopped in the doorway, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a fresh cup of coffee in her hand. She wore a charcoal gray blazer over a silk cream camisole, a perfect balance of corporate structure and relaxed sophistication. But it was her eyes that made Elena's breath catch. Harper's gaze swept down the length of Elena's blue suit, a slow, deliberate appraisal that felt more intimate than a touch. A small, devastating smile pulled at the corner of Harper's lips. "Good morning, Director," Harper said, her voice carrying that same low, rich resonance from the night before, though now laced with professional decorum. "You look exceptional. The blue suits you far better than I even anticipated." "It's a standard color for high-stakes presentations," Elena replied smoothly, though her pulse gave a traitorous flutter. She stepped around the boardroom table, maintaining a distance of precisely 4 feet. "Did you review the final renders after the system came back online?" Harper closed the distance between them, setting her portfolio on the table. She didn't respect the 4-foot boundary. She stopped just close enough for Elena to catch the scent of her perfume, vanilla mixed with the faint, crisp scent of the morning air. "I did," Harper said, leaning against the edge of the table, her eyes locked onto Elena's. "The compromise we found in the dark worked perfectly. The layout has your clean, unyielding structure, but the warmth gives it life. Just like we discussed." Elena felt the implication of her words like a physical weight. "Let's hope the clients agree. They arrive in 10 minutes. "They will," Harper said softly, her tone shifting from playful to entirely assured. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air between them for a split second before her fingers brushed against the lapel of Elena's blue jacket, smoothing a microscopic speck of lint away. Her fingertips grazed the fabric just above Elena's heart. "We're an unstoppable team, Elena. You just have to trust me." Elena stared at Harper's fingers before looking up into her amber eyes. The arrogance Harper usually carried was replaced by a quiet, fierce sincerity. It was the constant push and pull that was driving Elena mad. One moment Harper was an antagonist pushing her boundaries, and the next, she was the anchor Elena didn't know she needed. "I trust the work," Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A good start," Harper murmured, her eyes dropping briefly to Elena's lips before she stepped back, breaking the spell just as the elevator chimes signaled the arrival of the Logan Holdings executive team. For the next 2 hours, the boardroom became a theater of absolute professionalism. Elena took the lead, her presentation flawless, her command of the market metrics undeniable. She spoke with a cold, brilliant clarity that had the executives nodding in immediate agreement. But the real magic happened when she turned the floor over to Harper. Harper didn't just present the creative concept, she seduced the room with it. She spoke of emotional resonance, of human connection, of the unspoken desires of the consumer. As Harper spoke, she moved around the room with an effortless grace, her passion infectious. Twice during the presentation, Harper looked back at Elena to anchor a point, their eyes meeting in a shared, secret understanding. It was a flawless duet. Elena provided the unshakable foundation, and Harper built the sky. When the head of Logan Holdings finally stood up, extending his hand toward Elena with a broad smile, the tension in the room dissolved. "Brilliant work, Ms. Vance. The integration of structure and emotion is exactly what our brand needs. Consider the contract yours." After the handshakes, the congratulatory pleasantries, and the departure of the executives, the boardroom fell silent once more. The creative team had left to celebrate down the hall, their ecstatic voices echoing faintly through the corridor. Elena remained at the head of the table, her hands resting on the polished wood. The adrenaline of the victory was pumping through her veins, leaving her slightly breathless. Harper walked over to the glass wall, looking out at the city, before turning back to Elena. The professional facade dropped instantly. Harper looked radiant, her eyes bright with the thrill of the win. "We won," Harper said, a breathless laugh escaping her lips. "We did," Elena admitted, a genuine, rare smile breaking through her usual icy exterior. It was a beautiful smile, one that transformed her entire face, making her look vulnerable and breathtakingly soft. Harper seemed to freeze for a moment, captivated by the sight. She walked slowly back toward the table, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. "You should do that more often." "Do what?" "Smile like that. Without the armor." Harper stopped on the opposite side of the table, leaning her hands on the surface, tilting her head. "It's unfair how beautiful you are when you let your guard down, Elena." The directness of the compliments sent a rush of heat straight to Elena's cheeks. She turned away, pretending to gather her notes, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Harper, we are in the office. The pitch is over." "The pitch is over, which means we aren't just colleagues celebrating a win," Harper said, her voice dropping into that dangerous, magnetic register. She walked around the table, her steps deliberate. "Last night, the lights went out, and you asked me a question. You asked me what would happen if you admitted you liked having me close." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed up slightly until the small of her back hit the edge of the credenza against the wall. there was nowhere left to retreat. Harper stopped right in front of her, closing the space completely. "I didn't get to answer," Harper whispered, her gaze dropping to Elena's lips. "Harper." Elena's voice was a plea, though whether she was asking Harper to stop or to continue, she wasn't entirely sure. Harper raised her hand, her knuckles gently brushing against the high curve of Elena's cheekbone. The touch was incredibly tender, a sharp contrast to the aggressive confidence she usually displayed. Elena's eyes fluttered shut for a brief second, leaning into the warmth of the contact despite herself. "If you admit it," Harper murmured, her breath warm against Elena's face, "then I don't have to spend every meeting wondering if I'm the only one feeling this. I don't have to spend every night thinking about the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention." Elena opened her eyes, looking directly into the amber depths of Harper's. The professional boundary wasn't just blurred anymore, it was entirely gone, melted away by the heat between them. "You're not the only one," Elena confessed, the words slipping out before her intellect could stop them. Harper's eyes darkened with a sudden, intense heat. Her hand moved from Elena's cheek to the back of her neck, her fingers tangling slightly in the neat updos of Elena's hair, loosening a few strands. She leaned in, her lips lingering barely a millimeter away from Elena's. The anticipation was agonizing, a pure, electric pull that made Elena's hands find the lapels of Harper's blazer, pulling her just a fraction closer. "Good," Harper whispered against her lips. "Because I don't intend to let you slip back behind your wall." Before their lips could meet, the heavy boardroom door clicked, beginning to swing open as a junior designer called out, "Elena, the CEO wants us in the." Elena and Harper broke apart with practiced, lightning-fast synchronization, Harper stepping back to look out the window as if admiring the view, while Elena smoothly adjusted a stack of papers on the credenza. "I'll be right there," Elena called out, her voice remarkably steady despite the storm raging in her chest. The designer nodded and left, closing the door. Elena looked across the small distance to Harper. Harper turned around, her hair slightly disheveled from Elena's fingers, a victorious, utterly wicked grin on her face. "To be continued, Director," Harper said, casting one last lingering look at Elena's blue suit before walking toward the door. Elena stood alone in the sunlit room, her lips still tingling with the near miss, knowing that the rules she had lived by for years were officially broken. The bass from the speakers in the agency's main lounge vibrated through the soles of Elena's heels. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but the firm's partners had declared an immediate happy hour to celebrate the Logan Holdings victory. Caterers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, dry gin, and corporate triumph. Elena stood near the edge of the room, her fingers curled loosely around the stem of a crystal flute she had no intention of finishing. She had changed out of the sapphire blue jacket, wearing only the matching trousers and a sleeveless silk top, the formal armor stripped away but the poise remaining intact. To the rest of the room, she looked like the epitome of success, serene, unshakable, and completely in control. But her focus was fractured. Across the lounge, standing beneath a massive architectural pillar, Harper was surrounded by a circle of junior designers and senior partners alike. She had discarded her blazer entirely, the sleeves of her cream camisole catching the dim accent lighting of the room. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a sound completely swallowed by the ambient noise but one that Elena could visualize with terrifying clarity. As if sensing the weight of Elena's gaze, Harper turned her head. Her amber eyes cut through the crowd, locking onto Elena with precision. The laughter on her lips faded into something darker, more focused. She raised her glass in a slow, silent toast, her eyes never wavering. Elena felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She took a microscopic sip of her champagne, acknowledging the gesture with a curt nod before turning her back to walk toward the quiet sanctuary of the outdoor terrace. The glass doors shut out the roar of the party, replacing it with the muted hum of the city below. The evening air was warm, carrying the lingering moisture of the previous night's storm. Elena leaned against the stone balustrade, closing her eyes as the breeze stirred the loose strands of her hair. Running away from your own victory parade? Elena didn't open her eyes. She smiled faintly, the sound of the sliding glass door closing behind Harper the only warning she needed. I don't run, Harper. I simply prefer environments where I can hear myself think. And what are you thinking about? Harper's voice was closer now, the quiet click of her heels stopping just a foot away. She rested her forearms against the stone rail, looking out at the skyline rather than at Elena, giving her space, yet occupying it completely. Elena opened her eyes, looking at Harper's profile. In the fading light of the golden hour, Harper's skin seemed to glow, the sharp line of her jaw softened by the twilight. I was thinking that the Logan account is going to double our workload for the next fiscal quarter. Harper let out a soft sigh, turning her head to look at Elena, a mixture of amusement and exasperation in her expression. You are utterly hopeless. We just brought in the biggest fish this agency has seen in 3 years, and you're already calculating spreadsheets in your head. It's my job to calculate, Harper. It's your job to lead, Harper corrected softly. She shifted her weight, turning fully toward Elena. The proximity was deliberate, a subtle closing of the gap that brought the scent of her cedarwood perfume back into Elena's space. And right now, a leader should be celebrating. With me. Away from all of this. Elena looked down at the streetlights starting to flicker on below. We are celebrating. There is an entire room of people drinking premium liquor on the company dime right behind that glass. That's the agency's celebration, Harper murmured, her voice dropping into that quiet, intimate register that always made Elena's defenses crumble. She reached out, her fingers lightly catching the edge of Elena's silver watch, turning it slightly on her wrist. The contact was brief, but the warmth of Harper's skin lingered like a brand. I want ours. The one we started in the boardroom before we were so rudely interrupted. The memory of the near miss, of Harper's breath against her lips and the fierce, electric pull between them, rushed back with absolute clarity. Elena's breath hitched, her gaze rising to meet Harper's. The playful arrogance was gone from the art director's eyes, replaced by a raw, unblinking intensity that demanded honesty. Harper, we shouldn't push this, Elena said, though the lack of conviction in her own voice was embarrassing. We have to work together closely now. The stakes are higher. The stakes were already high, Harper countered, stepping closer, her front almost brushing against Elena's. She raised her hand, her fingers hovering just above Elena's bare shoulder, the heat radiating between them before she finally made contact, her thumb tracing the line of Elena's collarbone with agonizing slowness. You can keep pretending this is just professional friction if it makes you feel safe, Director. But we both know that wall is already full of cracks. Elena felt the structural integrity of her composure giving way. The constant pull, the endless game of emotional chess they had been playing for months, was reaching its endgame. She didn't pull away from the touch. Instead, her hand rose, her fingers wrapping around Harper's wrist, stopping the movement but not letting go. You're very confident for someone who could get us both reprimanded by HR, Elena whispered, her eyes fixed on Harper's lips. I'm confident because I know you want this just as much as I do, Harper whispered back. She tilted her head, her gaze dropping to Elena's hand on her wrist, a soft smile touching her lips. And because I know a place downtown that doesn't care about corporate policy. Let me take you there. Just one drink. No spreadsheets, no talk of the Logan account. Just us. Elena stared at her, the internal battle raging between the strict discipline that had defined her entire life and the terrifyingly beautiful chaos that Harper offered. The silence stretched between them, heavy with anticipation, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city. Finally, Elena let her hand slide down from Harper's wrist, her fingers brushing against Harper's palm before she detached herself completely. She turned back toward the glass doors, her expression unreadable. Harper's smile faltered slightly, a flash of disappointment crossing her features as she assumed she had pushed too far. Elena stopped at the door, her hand resting on the handle. She didn't look back, but her voice carried clearly across the quiet terrace. My car is in the lower garage. Meet me there in 10 minutes. If you're late, I'm leaving without you. The triumphant, brilliant smile that broke across Harper's face was something Elena didn't see, but she could hear it in the quick, sharp intake of Harper's breath. 10 minutes, Director, Harper called out. I'll beat you there. The lounge Harper chose was hidden down a cobblestone alley in Tribeca, marked only by a single, unlit iron lantern above a heavy oak door. Inside, the space was small, dimly lit by amber sconces that cast long shadows over plush velvet booths and dark mahogany paneling. A low, slow jazz melody drifted from the speakers, completely detached from the chaotic energy of the Midtown agency. They sat in a corner booth, the table between them small enough that their knees occasionally brushed beneath the polished wood. The waiter had brought 2 glasses of a dark, smoky bourbon, leaving them alone in the quiet shadows. Elena took a slow sip, the warmth of the alcohol settling in her chest. She looked across the table at Harper, who was watching her with an expression that could only be described as fascinated. Why this place? Elena asked, setting her glass down. Because nobody comes here to be seen, Harper replied, leaning her chin on her hand, her elbow resting on the table. In our industry, everyone is always performing. You especially. Here, you don't have to be Elena Vance, the infallible creative director. You can just be Elena. The use of her first name without the title felt heavy, intimate. Elena shifted slightly, her knee making prolonged contact with Harper's under the table. Neither of them moved away. And who is Elena, according to you? Someone who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders because she thinks if she lets go, everything will fall apart, Harper said softly, her amber eyes reflecting the warm glow of the candle on the table. The teasing edge was completely gone, replaced by a deep, genuine perception that caught Elena off guard. Someone who is incredibly brilliant, fiercely protective of her team, and terrifyingly beautiful when she forgets to be perfect. Elena looked away, a strange tightness forming in her throat. She wasn't used to being seen so clearly. In her world, people looked at her success, her standard of excellence, or her cold demeanor. Harper looked past all of it, straight into the places Elena tried hardest to hide. It's a competitive environment, Harper, Elena said, her voice softer now, stripped of its corporate authority. If you show vulnerability, people use it as leverage. I didn't get this position by being soft. I know, Harper said. She reached across the small table, her hand open, waiting. But you aren't in the office now. You don't have to win against me. Elena looked at Harper's open hand. The invitation was clear, a deliberate bridge built over the professional chasm that divided them. Slowly, With a hesitation that betrayed how much this meant to her, Elena reached out, sliding her fingers into Harper's palm. Harper's fingers closed around hers instantly, warm and firm, a reassuring weight that sent a wave of calm through Elena's chest. Harper didn't squeeze tightly, she simply held her thumb making slow, soothing circles across the back of Elena's hand. The silence that followed wasn't the tense, competitive silence of the office. It was comfortable, thick with a shared understanding that didn't require words. They sat like that for a long time, sipping their drinks, their hands joined in the center of the table, their knees pressed together in the dark booth. "We should probably get the check," Elena said eventually, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. The night had grown late, the jazz melody turning even slower, matching the quiet rhythm of the room. "Probably," Harper agreed, her voice a low murmur. She leaned across the table, her face coming into the small circle of candlelight. "But you haven't answered my question from the office." Elena tilted her head, her heart beginning its familiar, rapid beat. "Which question?" "The blue suit," Harper whispered, a wicked, beautiful spark returning to her eyes. "Did you wear it because I told you to?" Elena felt a flush of heat rise to her face, but this time, she didn't hide it. She looked directly into Harper's eyes, her fingers tightening around Harper's hand. "I wore it," Elena confessed, her voice dropping to a breathless whisper, "because for the first time in my life, I wanted to see if someone was looking at me the way I was looking at them." Harper's breath hitched, the answer clearly catching her off guard despite her usual confidence. The satisfaction that flared in her eyes was palpable, a deep, burning heat that made her slide out of the booth, her hand never letting go of Elena's as she stood beside the table. "Let's get out of here," Harper whispered, her gaze dropping to Elena's lips with an intensity that made the room feel entirely devoid of oxygen. "The night is still young, and I think we have a lot more rules to break." The cool night air of Tribeca hit them like a sudden awakening, a stark contrast to the amber warmth of the lounge. The cobblestone street was quiet, dark, and glistening faintly from the residual moisture of the afternoon. Elena stopped just outside the heavy oak door, the city breeze catching the silk of her top. She hadn't realized how shallow her breathing had become until the open air filled her lungs. Beside her, Harper adjusted the strap of her leather portfolio over her shoulder, but her other hand remained firmly anchored, her fingers still woven through Elena's. "You're remarkably quiet," Harper said softly, her voice cutting through the distant rumble of the FDR drive. She turned to face Elena, her expression a mix of gentle curiosity and unyielding focus. "Regretting the counterproposal already?" Elena looked down at their joined hands, then up into Harper's eyes. "I don't regret my decisions, Harper. I'm simply calculating the trajectory." "There you go again," Harper laughed, a low, melodic sound that seemed to belong entirely to the night. She stepped closer, closing the small distance the sidewalk allowed. "Always looking for the formula." "Some things don't have a trajectory, Elena. They just happen. Like a sudden downpour. You either run for cover, or you let yourself get soaked." "I have spent my entire life avoiding the rain," Elena admitted, the truth dropping from her lips with a raw honesty that surprised even herself. "I know," Harper murmured. Her gaze softened, her free hand rising to gently trace the lapel-less neckline of Elena's silk top, her knuckles brushing against the sensitive skin of her collarbone. "But I think you've been dry for far too long." The arrival of a yellow cab broke the heavy silence between them. Harper caught the driver's eye with a practiced, fluid motion, opening the door and waiting for Elena to slide inside before joining her. The interior of the taxi was a confined, shadowed world of its own. The neon grid of Manhattan bled across the windows, casting transient stripes of red, blue, and gold over Harper's face as the vehicle surged forward into the traffic. Inside the cab, the distance between them felt amplified by its brevity. Elena sat back against the vinyl seat, her shoulder pressing against Harper's with every turn the driver took. The scent of Harper's cedarwood perfume filled the tight space, intoxicating and grounding all at once. Harper didn't speak. Instead, she rested her hand on the seat between them, palm up, an open invitation that required no explanation. Elena didn't hesitate this time. She slid her hand into Harper's, letting her fingers interlock with a familiarity that felt as old as time, even though it had only begun hours ago. Harper's thumb immediately began its slow, rhythmic stroke across Elena's knuckles, a silent reassurance that spoke louder than any corporate pitch. As the cab crossed into the Upper West Side, pulling up to the awning of Elena's high-rise apartment building, the reality of the evening settled in. Elena paid the driver while Harper stepped out onto the sidewalk, looking up at the towering glass and stone structure. "It suits you," Harper remarked as Elena joined her under the awning. "High, structured, perfectly designed." "It's quiet," Elena countered, her voice carrying a nervous edge she hated. She led the way through the glass doors, nodding to the night doorman who looked politely away from their joined hands. The elevator ride to the 24th floor was an exercise in pure tension. The mechanical hum of the lift was the only sound, the digital numbers ticking upward with agonizing slowness. They stood in opposite corners of the small car, yet the invisible thread pulling them together felt taut enough to snap. Harper's eyes never left Elena's, a burning, patient intensity in her amber gaze that made Elena's pulse race against her ribs. When the doors finally slid open to Elena's private foyer, the quiet of the apartment welcomed them. Elena stepped inside, switching on a single low lamp that illuminated the minimalist living room, clean lines, monochromatic tones, an immaculate space devoid of clutter. Harper walked in behind her, setting her portfolio by the door. She didn't explore the room. Her focus remained entirely on the woman standing in the center of it. Elena turned around, her breath catching as she found Harper already standing right in front of her. The playful confidence Harper usually wore like armor had evaporated, replaced by a vulnerability that matched Elena's own. "You're trembling," Harper whispered, her voice a feather-light vibration in the quiet room. She raised both hands, her palms cupping the sides of Elena's face, her thumbs wiping away a strand of hair that had fallen across Elena's cheek. The touch was warm, steady, and devastatingly tender. "I'm not used to this," Elena confessed, her hands rising to grasp Harper's wrists, not to pull them away, but to anchor them there. "I don't know how to do this without a plan, Harper." "You don't need a plan," Harper murmured, leaning down slightly, her face closing the final few inches of distance. "Just follow the warmth, Elena. Let me be the one variable you don't try to control." The proximity was agonizing, the air between their lips charged with a months-old current of unexpressed desire, professional rivalry, and unspoken affection. Elena looked up into Harper's eyes, seeing the reflection of her own longing, the complete surrender of her icy fortress. "Harper," Elena breathed, her voice a broken whisper against Harper's lips. "I'm right here," Harper replied. And then, the space dissolved entirely. The kiss wasn't the aggressive clash of their corporate personas, it was a slow, breathless revelation. Harper's lips were soft, parting slightly as they met Elena's with a gentle, deliberate pressure that made Elena's knees feel weak. A quiet gasp escaped Elena's throat, her hands sliding up from Harper's wrists to tangle in the dark, soft layers of Harper's hair, pulling her closer, erasing every remaining millimeter of separation. The sensation was overwhelming, a rush of pure, unadulterated sweetness that flooded Elena's system. The rigid geometry of her life vanished, replaced by the fluid, chaotic heat of Harper's embrace. Harper shifted her weight, her arms wrapping around Elena's waist, lifting her slightly, pressing her back against the solid structure of the nearby wall. The contact was electric. Elena leaned into the support, her fingers tightening in Harper's hair as the kiss deepened, turning from a tentative question into a definitive answer. It was the pull, the exquisite friction they had fought against for months, finally resolving into a perfect, harmonious alignment. When Harper finally pulled back, just a fraction of an inch, her breath was ragged, her amber eyes dark with an intensity that took Elena's breath away. She rested her forehead against Elena's, her chest heaving against Elena's own. "See?" Harper whispered, a breathless, beautiful smile breaking across her lips as she looked at the flush on Elena's cheeks. "No spreadsheets required." Elena let out a soft laugh, her hands resting on Harper's shoulders, her heart hammering a frantic, joyful rhythm against her ribs. The armor was completely gone, leaving behind a version of Elena Vance that only Harper Wilde would ever see, soft, radiant, and entirely alive. "You're infuriating," Elena murmured, her thumb tracing the lower lip she had just thoroughly kissed. "I'm effective," Harper corrected, her eyes sparkling with that familiar, wicked intelligence. She leaned in again, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the corner of Elena's mouth, then down the line of her jaw, making Elena shiver in her arms. "And I think our partnership is just getting started." The morning sun filtered through the high glass windows of the agency, casting sharp, golden geometric patterns across the polished concrete floors. The ambient hum of the office had returned to its predictable rhythm, the whirring of the espresso machine, the quiet click of keyboards, and the low murmur of strategy teams discussing the upcoming quarter. Elena sat at her desk, a cup of black tea cooling untouched beside her laptop. She wore a tailored cream trouser suit today, the lines sharp and uncompromising, the fabric pristine. To anyone walking past her glass office, she looked exactly like the woman who had secured the Logan Holdings account 24 hours prior, focused, analytical, and entirely detached from the world around her. But the cursor on her screen had been blinking on the same sentence of the campaign timeline for 10 minutes. Every time she closed her eyes, the sterile white light of the office vanished, replaced by the memory of the shadow-drenched corner of her apartment. She could still feel the distinct weight of Harper's hands against her jawline, the slow, deliberate surrender of her own breath, and the intoxicating reality of a boundary not just crossed, but completely dissolved. A sharp knock on the glass door shattered her thoughts. Elena blinked, her posture instantly correcting itself as she looked up. Marcus, the agency's managing partner, stood there with a stack of folders, accompanied by Harper. Harper looked entirely at home in the corporate sunlight. She wore an emerald green silk blouse with the sleeves rolled up, her dark hair gathered into a loose, effortless twist at the back of her head. There was no trace of hesitation in her stride, no lingering vulnerability from the night before. She carried her digital tablet under one arm, her amber eyes scanning a document with professional detachment. "Elena, do you have 5 minutes?" Marcus asked, pushing the door open. "We need to finalize the creative leads for the Logan onboarding next week." "Of course," Elena said, her voice smooth and steady, a perfect imitation of her usual self. "Sit down." Marcus took the chair directly opposite the desk, while Harper took the one slightly to the side. As she sat, Harper's gaze finally shifted to Elena. It was a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that Marcus completely missed, but the heat in Harper's amber eyes was unmistakable. A small, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of Harper's mouth told Elena everything she needed to know. The art director wasn't unaffected, she was simply playing the game. So, Marcus began, laying out the organizational chart. Logan Holdings wants a dedicated creative director and a senior art director on site for the first 3 weeks of the campaign. Obviously, given the success of the pitch, the partners want the two of you to lead the transition. The only concern is the schedule. It requires absolute synchronization. Synchronization won't be an issue, Elena replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the chart to avoid looking at Harper. The structure for the initial rollout is already mapped out. We just need to ensure the creative assets match the technical milestones. I agree with the structure, Harper's voice cut in, rich and calm. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the edge of Elena's desk, deliberately invading the workspace just as she had the night before. But as we discovered during the final edits, the structure only works if we allow for flexibility in the execution. If we lock ourselves into rigid timelines too early, we lose the emotional resonance of the campaign. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. True. The client specifically praised the balance between the two approaches. How do you propose we handle the oversight, Harper? Harper looked directly at Elena, her eyes locking onto the creative directors with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. I think it requires constant, close collaboration. Regular updates. Sometimes outside of normal operating hours, if the project demands it. We need to be fully aligned on every variable. Elena felt her pulse quicken against the collar of her cream jacket. The double meaning in Harper's words was a delicate, dangerous thread woven right into the professional conversation. It was the pull, the exquisite tension of behaving like strangers while their skin still remembered the heat of the night before. Out-of-hours reviews should be kept to a minimum to maintain efficiency, Elena countered, her tone clipped but laced with a subtle warmth that only Harper would recognize. However, I am willing to accommodate special sessions if the creative director deems them necessary. Harper's smile widened by a millimeter. Understood, Director. I'll make sure the creative director is kept fully informed. Marcus looked between the two of them, entirely oblivious to the undercurrents vibrating across the mahogany desk. Perfect. I'll let the board know you're both aligned. We'll sign off on the transition team by Friday afternoon. He stood up, gathering his folders. Excellent work, ladies. Keep this synergy going, and we'll be looking at a global expansion by winter. As Marcus left the office, the heavy glass door swung shut, leaving Elena and Harper alone. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. The professional mask Harper had worn so easily seemed to soften, her shoulders dropping slightly as she looked at Elena. Elena didn't move. She remained seated, her hands resting flat on the desk, her expression guarded but her eyes revealing the chaotic rhythm of her thoughts. Synergy, Harper murmured, repeating Marcus's word with a soft, ironic chuckle. She didn't stand up. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her gaze tracking the elegant line of Elena's cream suit. He has no idea how right he is. Harper, we are in the middle of the office, Elena said, though the reprimand lacked its usual ice. She glanced toward the glass wall, where junior staff members were walking past. The glass is tinted, Elena. And nobody is looking, Harper said softly. She stood up, walking around the desk with that quiet, predatory grace that Elena had come to expect. She didn't stop until she was standing right beside Elena's chair, her presence immediately shifting the gravity of the room. Besides, We're just discussing the campaign timeline. Elena turned her chair to face her, looking up into the amber eyes that had occupied her mind all morning. Is that what we're doing? We're establishing protocol, Harper whispered. She reached out, her fingers catching the edge of Elena's desk, leaning down until her face was level with Elena's. The scent of vanilla and cedarwood enveloped Elena instantly, a sensory trigger that brought the memory of the apartment back with terrifying vividness. For instance, the protocol for when the creative director is working too hard and forgets to breathe. Harper raised her other hand, her fingertips lightly brushing against the side of Elena's neck, just above the collar of her jacket. The contact was electric, a sharp contrast to the air-conditioned coolness of the room. Elena's eyes fluttered shut for a brief second, her hand rising instinctively to touch Harper's arm, her fingers tightening around the silk of Harper's sleeve. You're going to get us caught, Elena murmured, her voice losing its edge completely, replaced by a soft, breathless vulnerability. Then let's change the venue, Harper replied, her thumb tracing the soft skin right behind Elena's ear, a gesture so tender it made Elena's heart ache. Tonight. My place. No timelines, no markers, no glass walls. Just the variable you can't control. Elena opened her eyes, looking into the depth of Harper's gaze. The fear of discovery, the years of strict discipline, the professional boundaries, all of it felt incredibly small compared to the magnetic pull drawing her toward the woman standing beside her. She realized, with a quiet sense of certainty, that the fortress she had built to protect herself wasn't a prison anymore, it was an open door. Address, Elena whispered. Harper's eyes flared with a sudden, triumphant warmth. She leaned in, her lips lingering barely an inch from Elena's cheek, her breath warm against her skin. I'll text it to you at 5. Don't be late, Director. With a slow, lingering withdrawal of her fingers, Harper stepped back, her professional posture snapping back into place as if it had never left. She picked up her digital tablet from the desk, gave Elena one last, burning look, and walked out of the office, leaving the glass door to click shut behind her. Elena sat alone in the sunlit room, her hand rising to touch the spot on her neck where Harper's skin had rested. The cursor on her monitor was still blinking, but the timeline didn't matter anymore. The trajectory was set, and for the first time in her life, Elena was looking forward to the rain. The address Harper sent at precisely 5 o'clock led Elena away from the structured glass towers of Manhattan and into a quiet, industrial corner of Williamsburg. The building was a converted 19th-century factory, its weathered red brick holding the warmth of the July sun long after dusk had fallen. Elena stood in the dim corridor of the 4th floor, her fingers resting on the brass numbers of apartment 4B. She had kept her cream trousers on but had exchanged her blazer for a simple, fine-knit black top. Her hair was down, falling in smooth, dark waves around her shoulders, a conscious choice that felt like leaving her shield in the car. She knocked. 3 rhythmic counts. The door swung open almost instantly, as if Harper had been standing right behind it. The contrast between their everyday realities was immediate. Harper had entirely shed the corporate mold. She wore an oversized, faded charcoal vintage t-shirt that hung loosely off one shoulder, paired with soft, well-worn denim shorts. Her dark hair was messy, held up by a single wooden clip, with loose strands framing her face. She was barefoot, holding a wooden spoon in one hand, smelling faintly of garlic, white wine, and basil. For a second, neither of them spoke. The hallway filled with the sound of a vintage record player spinning a low, melancholic indie track from inside the apartment. A slow, genuine smile spread across Harper's face, entirely devoid of the competitive edge she used in the boardroom. You're exactly on time, Director. I shouldn't be surprised. I don't like to keep people waiting, Elena said, her voice softer than it ever was at the agency. Come in, Harper said, stepping back to let Elena pass. Elena entered and stopped, taking in the space. If Elena's apartment was a study in minimalism and geometric restraint, Harper's loft was a living, breathing canvas. Exposed timber beams crossed the high ceiling. Unfinished oil paintings leaned against the brick walls, vibrant bursts of indigo, amber, and deep crimson breaking through the shadows. A massive, worn leather sofa sat in the center of the room, surrounded by overgrown monstera plants and stacks of art books. It was chaotic, intentional, and overwhelmingly warm. It's beautiful, Harper, Elena murmured, turning around. Harper closed the door, locking it with a quiet click that sounded remarkably final. She set the wooden spoon down on a small counter and walked over to Elena, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. It's honest. That's all I try to make it. She stopped just inches away, her gaze dropping to Elena's open collarbone, then rising to meet her blue eyes. The ambient light from the string lanterns overhead caught the gold flecks in Harper's vision. You look different without the office walls behind you. Fewer defenses? Elena asked, tilting her head. Softer, Harper whispered. She reached out, her fingers catching a lock of Elena's dark hair, gently brushing it behind her shoulder. Her hand lingered on the side of Elena's neck, the warmth of her palm acting like a magnet. Elena found herself leaning into the touch, her eyelids dropping slightly as the tension of the entire week began to drain from her shoulders. Come into the kitchen. I'm making pasta, and you look like you haven't eaten a real meal since Tuesday. The kitchen was small, separated from the living area by a thick butcher block island. Elena sat on one of the industrial iron stools, watching Harper move around the space. There was a fluid, unhurried grace to the way Harper cooked, tossing cherry tomatoes into a sizzling pan and pouring a generous splash of white wine into the sauce. You never told me you could cook, Elena noted, resting her chin on her hand, her elbow on the counter. You never asked, Harper replied, looking over her shoulder with a playful wink. She picked up a bottle of chilled Pinot Grigio and poured 2 generous glasses, sliding one across the wood to Elena. We spent 3 months talking about margins, font weights, and target demographics. You didn't leave much room for personal bias, Elena. Elena picked up the glass, the cool condensation refreshing against her palm. That was the rule. Keep the personal out of the professional. And look how well that turned out for us, Harper teased. She walked around the counter, bringing her own glass with her, and leaned against the wood right next to Elena's stool. Her thigh brushed against Elena's knee, a light, continuous contact that sent a slow, simmering heat through Elena's veins. Tell me the truth. When did you first notice me? And don't give me the when you submitted your portfolio corporate answer. Elena took a slow sip of her wine, letting the crisp flavor settle before she looked up. The honesty of the apartment was contagious, and she was tired of hiding behind protocols. It was the second week after you started, Elena said, her voice dropping into a quiet, reflective tone. We were in the large conference room, reviewing the winter campaign. Everyone was nodding along with my notes, terrified to disagree. You were sitting at the far end of the table, spinning a blue pen between your fingers. When I finished, you didn't look intimidated at all. You just looked straight at me and said, the logic is perfect, but the soul is completely missing. Harper smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I remember that. I thought you were going to fire me on the spot. I wanted to, Elena admitted, a genuine laugh escaping her lips. But I also spent the rest of the night looking through your past designs, trying to figure out how someone could be so infuriatingly confident. You were the first person in 3 years who looked at my work and saw the person making it, rather than just the title on the door. Harper's expression softened, the playful banter fading into something deeply tender. She set her wine glass down on the counter and shifted closer, her front turning completely toward Elena. She raised her hand, her thumb gently tracing the high line of Elena's jaw, her fingers curling behind Elena's ear. I wasn't trying to challenge your authority, Elena, Harper murmured, her breath warm against Elena's face. I was trying to get you to look at me. Really look at me. I am looking at you, Elena whispered, her heart accelerating, a beautiful, frantic rhythm echoing in her chest. Good, Harper said. She leaned in, her movement slow, giving Elena every opportunity to pull back. But Elena didn't move. She met Harper halfway, her lips parting as they touched Harper's. The kiss was entirely different from the hurried, electric friction of the office or the breathless surprise of the apartment doorway. This was a slow, deep exploration, rich with the sweetness of the wine and the quiet security of the room. Harper's lips were soft, moving against Elena's with a patient, unhurried demand that made Elena feel completely unmoored. Elena's hands found the hem of Harper's oversized t-shirt, her fingers sliding underneath the soft fabric to touch the bare skin of Harper's waist. Harper let out a low, shuddering breath against Elena's mouth, her arms tightening around Elena's neck, pulling her off the stool until they were standing chest to chest, completely entangled. The warmth of Harper's skin under her fingers sent a wave of raw emotion through Elena. The strict discipline she had cultivated for a decade didn't feel like a shield anymore, it felt like baggage she was finally allowed to drop. She let herself sink into the embrace, her fingers pressing into the small of Harper's back, anchoring them together as the kiss deepened. When the timer on the stove gave a sharp, sudden beep, they broke apart, both of them breathless, their lips flushed and parted. Harper rested her forehead against Elena's, a quiet, happy laugh vibrating through her chest. The pasta is ready. Let it wait, Elena murmured, her eyes dark with a rare, fierce desire as she caught the lapel of Harper's shirt, pulling her back in for another brief, lingering kiss. The director of operations, breaking dinner schedules. Harper teased against her lips, though she didn't pull away. Marcus would be shocked. Marcus isn't here, Elena said, her voice steady and full of absolute certainty. Nobody is here but us. They ate dinner on the large leather sofa, the plates resting on their laps, the indie record spinning to its end and leaving only the quiet sound of the Williamsburg breeze rustling the leaves of the monstera plants. They talked about everything they had avoided for months, their childhoods, the choices that brought them to the city, the fears they hid behind their successes. By midnight, the plates had been cleared, and the apartment was cast in the deep, quiet shadows of the late hours. Elena lay back against the plush cushions of the sofa, her legs stretched out, with Harper curled up against her side. Harper's head rested on Elena's chest, her dark hair scattered across the black knit of Elena's top. Elena's arm was wrapped securely around Harper's shoulders, her fingers idly tracing patterns on Harper's bare arm, feeling the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. What are you thinking about? Harper asked softly, her voice heavy with sleep. Elena looked down at the woman in her arms, feeling a profound sense of peace she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. The variables were gone. The trajectory didn't matter. I'm thinking, Elena whispered, pressing a soft kiss to the top of Harper's head, that I don't care if it rains tomorrow. Harper shifted, looking up with a sleepy, beautiful smile, her amber eyes reflecting the final, dim glow of the string lights. Good. Because I checked the forecast. It's going to pour. The morning arrived not with a sudden glare of sunlight, but with the steady, rhythmic drumming of rain against the industrial glass panes. Grey light filtered through the loft, softening the sharp edges of the exposed brick and casting the unfinished canvases into gentle relief. Elena woke before her internal alarm could signal. For the first time in years, the transition from sleep to awareness did not bring a rush of mental checklists or schedules. Instead, she felt the heavy, comforting warmth of the duvet, the steady rhythm of the rain, and the quiet presence of Harper beside her. Harper was still asleep, curled slightly toward Elena, one hand resting flat against the mattress between them. Without the sharp, defensive energy she wore in the office, Harper looked younger, her features softened by rest. A dark lock of hair fell across her cheek, rising and falling with her breath. Elena remained still, watching her. The silence of the loft was absolute, insulated from the city by the downpour. She reached out, her movements deliberate and slow, and used the tips of her fingers to brush the stray hair away from Harper's face. The skin of Harper's cheek was warm, incredibly soft. Harper stirred at the touch. Her eyelashes fluttered open, her amber eyes heavy with sleep but focusing instantly on Elena. A slow, contented smile curved her lips, a look of pure, unguarded recognition that made Elena's chest tighten with something vast and unfamiliar. "Good morning, Director," Harper murmured, her voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a pleasant shiver down Elena's spine. "Good morning," Elena replied softly. She didn't pull her hand away. Harper caught Elena's fingers, bringing them to her lips and pressing a soft, lingering kiss against her knuckles. "You're awake early," Harper said, shifting closer until her shoulder rested against Elena's. The contact was seamless, natural, as if they had shared this space for years rather than hours. No spreadsheets to conquer at dawn. "The agency doesn't open for another 2 hours, Elena said, though the thought of the office felt distant, almost abstract. "And the rain is slowing down traffic. We have time." Harper tilted her head, her eyes searching Elena's face with that characteristic intensity that had once infuriated her, but now felt like an anchor. "Then let's use it." Harper leaned up, her hand finding the back of Elena's neck, her fingers tangling gently in the dark waves of her hair. She pulled Elena down into a kiss that tasted of the quiet morning, slow, deep, and thoroughly unhurried. There was no competitive energy here, no professional boundaries to navigate, just a profound, sweet certainty that left Elena breathless. By 9 o'clock, the reality of the agency reclaimed them, though the landscape had shifted entirely. The rain had turned Manhattan into a monochrome grid of umbrellas and wet asphalt. Elena walked through the glass doors of the agency, her umbrella dripping into the plastic stand, her cream trousers replaced by a sharp, tailored black wool skirt and a silk charcoal blouse. Her composure was flawless, her expression serene and unreadable as she exchanged nods with the receptionist. 10 minutes later, Harper arrived. She wore a structured trench coat over a simple white button-down and tailored trousers, her hair pulled back into its familiar, elegant twist. They met in the central corridor, a public space flanked by the glass walls of the account executive's offices. To anyone watching, it was a standard morning encounter between senior staff members. "Good morning, Ms. Wilde," Elena said as they crossed paths, her voice carrying the precise, cool weight of her professional persona. "Did you receive the updated brief from Logan Holdings?" "I did, Ms. Vance," Harper replied, stopping just short of the professional threshold. She held a digital tablet against her chest, her expression entirely serious, though the amber depths of her eyes held a secret, burning spark that was meant for Elena alone. The creative team is already adjusting the asset allocation based on the new milestones. I'll have the initial concepts on your desk by noon. Excellent. Ensure the typography aligns with the corporate standards we established yesterday, Elena said, her gaze lingering on Harper's lips for a fraction of a second before she turned to enter her office. Always, Director, Harper murmured, the title carrying a quiet, intimate subtext that caused a sharp pulse of adrenaline to hit Elena's chest. The day proceeded with the relentless friction of corporate administration. The success of the Logan pitch had brought a surge of energy to the firm, and Elena's office became the focal point of the transition. There were budgets to sign, resource allocations to approve, and junior designers to brief. Yet, beneath the noise, the secret they shared remained an electric current, keeping Elena entirely grounded. Every time she reviewed a design layout or checked a timeline, she felt the phantom weight of Harper's touch, the memory of the quiet loft lingering like a shield against the corporate chaos. At 11:30, Elena walked down to the creative floor to check on the progress of the design assets. The room was a hive of activity, large monitors displaying vibrant variations of the Logan branding, designers debating color theory across long tables. Harper stood at the head of the main table, guiding a junior designer through a complex rendering. She spoke with a quiet, absolute authority, her technical knowledge sharp, her passion evident in every gesture. Elena watched her from the doorway, a feeling of intense, quiet pride settling in her chest. Harper wasn't just a variable, she was a force, brilliant and entirely self-assured. As if sensing the observation, Harper looked up from the monitor. Her eyes met Elena's across the crowded, noisy room. The professional distance between them seemed to vanish for a heartbeat, replaced by a silent, mutual understanding. Harper gave a microscopic nod, a reassurance that the work was handled, and that the partnership was intact. Elena returned to her office, the quiet satisfaction carried with her. Exactly at noon, a knock sounded on her glass door. "Come in," Elena said, not looking up from her screen. Harper entered, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She carried a leather folder, setting it down on the mahogany desk with professional precision. "The initial concepts for the Logan onboarding, as promised," Harper said, her tone formal. Elena reached for the folder, but as her hand touched the leather, Harper's fingers slid across the surface, covering Elena's hand entirely. The contact was hidden from the glass wall by the angle of the folder itself, a private sanctuary created in the middle of a sunlit office. Elena looked up, her breath hitching as she met Harper's gaze. The professional mask had dropped entirely, replaced by the raw, magnetic warmth that had redefined Elena's world. "You're working too hard again," Harper whispered, her thumb making a slow, deliberate circle against the back of Elena's hand. "Marcus said you skipped the department lunch." "I had budgets to finalize," Elena said, her voice dropping to a soft, breathless murmur, her fingers tightening around Harper's. "The structure requires maintenance, Harper." "The structure can wait 20 minutes, Harper countered gently. She reached into the pocket of her trench coat, which was draped over her arm, and withdrew a small, wrapped pastry from the bakery near her loft, setting it quietly beside Elena's tea. "Eat." "That's a directive from the art department." Elena stared at the pastry, then up at Harper, a genuine, beautiful smile breaking through her usual restraint. The sheer sweetness of the gesture, the effortless way Harper took care of the details Elena always ignored, made the corporate walls feel incredibly fragile. "Is this part of the onboarding strategy?" Elena teased, her eyes bright. "It's part of the protocol," Harper whispered, leaning in just an inch closer, her eyes fixing on Elena's lips with an intensity that made the air-conditioned room feel suddenly warm. For when I can't kiss you in front of 40 people, but I still need you to know exactly what I'm thinking about. Elena swallowed, the electric tension between them taut and beautiful. And what are you thinking about, Ms. Wilde? I'm thinking, Harper murmured, her fingers releasing Elena's hand with a slow, agonizingly reluctant withdrawal, that we have a long flight to Chicago for the Logan client dinner on Thursday. And the agency always books first-class seats next to each other. With a slow, knowing wink that left Elena's heart hammering against her ribs, Harper picked up her tablet, adjusted her posture, and walked out of the office, the glass door clicking shut behind her. Elena sat alone, the small pastry resting beside her computer, the timeline completely forgotten as she looked out at the rain-washed city, knowing that the journey ahead was going to be anything but predictable. The premium departure lounge at JFK was an island of quiet luxury insulated from the chaotic rush of the main terminal. Soft, recessed lighting glowed against brushed brass accents, and the faint, polished clink of crystal glassware punctuated the low murmur of traveling executives. Outside the massive sweep of plate glass windows, the evening sky over the runway had deepened into a rich, velvety violet, the amber and white transit lights of the tarmac stretching out like a constellation of fallen stars. Elena sat in a high-backed leather armchair in the quietest corner of the lounge, her laptop open on her knees. She had traded her office attire for a charcoal silk blouse, dark tailored trousers, and a structured black trench coat draped over the back of her seat. To any casual observer, she was the picture of executive focus, her fingers moving across the keyboard with rhythmic efficiency as she reviewed the final brief for the Logan Holdings dinner in Chicago. Yet, her concentration was entirely superficial. Every few sentences, her gaze would drift toward the entrance of the lounge, tracking the arrival of new passengers with a quiet, persistent anticipation she could no longer deny. You're editing a document that has already been approved by 3 different managing partners, a voice murmured from directly behind her shoulder. Elena didn't startle, but a sudden, sharp warmth bloomed in her chest. She closed the laptop halfway, turning her head just enough to see Harper leaning over the back of the armchair. Harper had embraced the casual elegance of travel. She wore a soft, oversized black cashmere sweater that contrasted beautifully with her dark hair, which she had left down, allowing the loose waves to brush against her shoulders. A pair of tailored gray slacks and pristine white sneakers completed the look, making her appear effortlessly sophisticated. She held 2 glasses of champagne, the amber liquid bubbling gently in the dim light. It never hurts to ensure perfection, Ms. Wilde, Elena said, her voice dropping into that smooth, quiet cadence reserved only for their private moments. Perfection is a moving target, Director, Harper replied, stepping around the chair and offering one of the glasses to Elena. As Elena took it, Harper's fingers deliberately brushed against hers, a slow, lingering contact that sent a familiar electric current straight down Elena's spine. Harper sat in the identical armchair directly adjacent to Elena's, shifting her weight so she was angled toward the older woman. She took a slow sip of her champagne, her amber eyes locking onto Elena's with an unblinking intensity that made the surrounding lounge disappear entirely. You look tired, Harper observed gently, the competitive edge completely gone from her tone, replaced by a genuine, protective concern. Did you actually sleep last night, or did you spend the hours calculating the exact margin of error for the Chicago presentation? Elena looked down at her glass, a small, self-deprecating smile touching her lips. I slept. Just less than usual. My mind keeps returning to the timeline. The timeline, or the variable? Harper teased, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a low vibration that seemed to bypass Elena's ears and strike straight at her heart. She reached across the small space separating their chairs, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest of Elena's chair, mere millimeters from Elena's wrist. Because if it's the variable, I can assure you, she doesn't bite. Unless you ask her to. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Harper's hand, then up into the warmth of her gaze. The pull between them had reached a point where even a public space felt dangerous, every word loaded with a subtext that threatened to shatter the professional distance they maintained during the day. Harper, Elena whispered, a soft warning that sounded more like an invitation. I know, Harper murmured, her eyes softening as she withdrew her hand just a fraction, though her focus remained absolute. Public discretion. Corporate protocol. I'm playing by the rules, Elena. But the flight hasn't even boarded yet, and I'm already counting down the hours until we're away from the office entirely. The announcement for their flight broke the moment, a chime chiming softly through the lounge speakers. First-class passengers for Flight 1402 to Chicago O'Hare, boarding now at Gate 4. Harper stood up, picking up her leather travel bag with a fluid, athletic grace. She extended a hand to Elena, her palm open, waiting. Shall we, Director? Your first-class cabin awaits. Elena stared at the open hand for a beat before closing her laptop, packing it away, and standing up. She didn't take Harper's hand, not here, under the watchful eyes of the lounge attendants, but the lingering look she gave the younger woman as she walked past her was more than enough of an answer. The first-class cabin of the wide-body aircraft was a sanctuary of privacy. Their seats were configured as a double suite in the center row, separated from the rest of the cabin by high, curved panels and equipped with a retractable privacy screen between them. Elena settled into her seat, the plush leather conforming to her posture as she stowed her coat. A flight attendant immediately offered warm towels and pre-departure beverages, which they both declined with polite, practiced efficiency. As soon as the flight attendant withdrew, Harper reached for the small control panel on her armrest. With a quiet hum, the privacy partition between their seats lowered completely, opening up the space and creating a single, private enclave hidden from the rest of the plane. Much better, Harper said, leaning back against her headrest and turning her face toward Elena. Elena adjusted the settings of her own seat, reclining it slightly. The physical proximity was intense. Because of the configuration, their shoulders were less than 2 feet apart, their knees separated only by the narrow central console. The cabin lights began to dim as the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the standard white illumination shifting into a deep, soothing indigo that cast long, intimate shadows across Harper's features. The plane began its long taxi toward the runway, the low, powerful rumble of the jet engines vibrating through the floorboards. Elena felt a sudden wave of vulnerability hit her. For the next 2 hours, she was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet, completely removed from the safety of her office, her desk, and the corporate structure that usually dictated her behavior. There were no meetings to run, no budgets to balance. There was only Harper, sitting in the indigo twilight, watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated devotion. You're doing it again, Harper said softly, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the cabin. Doing what? Retreating into your own head, Harper said. She reached across the central console, her hand open, waiting on the leather surface. The fortress is miles below us now, Elena. You don't have to defend anything up here. Elena looked at Harper's hand, illuminated by the faint blue glow of the reading lights. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her own hand, sliding her fingers into Harper's palm. Harper's fingers closed around hers instantly, warm, firm, and entirely unyielding. She didn't just hold Elena's hand, she pulled it slightly closer, resting their joined hands on the edge of the console between them. Her thumb began a slow, mesmerizing stroke across the sensitive skin of Elena's inner wrist, right over the rapid, erratic beat of her pulse. "Your heart is racing," Harper noted, a soft, victorious smile touching her lips in the darkness. "Takeoffs always make me slightly uneasy," Elena lied, her voice a low murmur. "Liar," Harper whispered, her eyes darkening with a sudden, intense heat. She shifted her weight, leaning closer to the partition, her face now bare inches from Elena's. The scent of her cedarwood and vanilla perfume filled Elena's senses, thick and intoxicating in the confined space. "You're not afraid of the flying, Elena. You're afraid of how much you like being unable to escape me." Elena didn't deny it. She couldn't. The physical honesty of the touch, the absolute privacy of the darkened suite, and the sheer sweetness of Harper's presence had melted the last remaining fragments of her icy exterior. "And if I am?" Elena asked, her voice dropping to a breathless whisper, her blue eyes locking onto Harper's with a fierce, quiet intensity. "What do you plan to do about it, Ms. Wilde?" Harper's breath hitched, the sudden shift from Elena's usual restraint to raw, direct confrontation catching her off guard in the best possible way. The satisfaction that flared in her amber eyes was palpable. She reached down with her free hand, retrieving the heavy, dark grey cashmere blanket provided by the airline, and draped it over both of their laps, effectively hiding their lower halves from view. Beneath the heavy fabric, the intimacy escalated instantly. Harper slid her hand up from Elena's wrist, her fingers tracing the long, elegant line of Elena's forearm before finding the hem of her silk blouse. Her fingertips made contact with the bare skin of Elena's wrist and lower arm, a warm, electric pressure that caused Elena's eyes to flutter shut, a quiet gasp escaping her lips. "I plan," Harper murmured, her voice a feather-light vibration right next to Elena's ear as she leaned across the space, "to spend the next 2 hours reminding you that the rules don't apply when we're above the clouds. And when we land in Chicago, I plan to show you exactly what happens when the creative department takes full control." Elena's fingers tightened convulsively around Harper's shoulder, her hand rising to grip the soft cashmere of Harper's sweater as the younger woman leaned in even closer, her lips brushing against the high curve of Elena's cheekbone before lingering agonizingly close to the corner of her mouth. The anticipation was a physical ache, a pure, exquisite pull that made the cabin around them fade into absolute nothingness. The plane surged forward, the sudden acceleration of takeoff pressing them back into their seats, but their hands remained locked beneath the blanket, a secret, burning anchor in the dark. The descent into Chicago O'Hare was a gradual transition through a dense layer of low-hanging clouds, culminating in the sharp, wet glare of a rain-slicked runway. The wheels struck the tarmac with a definitive thump, the sudden reverse thrust of the engines roaring through the cabin and breaking the suspended animation of the flight. Beneath the heavy grey blanket in the first-class suite, Elena slowly withdrew her hand from Harper's. Her skin felt suddenly cold without the constant, reassuring warmth of Harper's palm. She adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse, her movements mechanical, a return to the physical script she had practiced for a decade. The cabin lights flickered from the deep indigo twilight back to a functional, sterile white as the aircraft taxied toward the gate. Harper did not rush to break the silence. She remained reclined, watching the transformation of the woman next to her. The vulnerable, breathless version of Elena Vance who had clung to the cashmere blanket minutes ago was receding, replaced layer by layer by the formidable creative director. The transition is always the hardest part, isn't it? Harper said softly, her voice pitched below the ambient noise of the passengers gathering their carry-on bags. Elena paused, her hand hovering over the latch of her briefcase. She looked at Harper, seeing the absolute lack of fear in the younger woman's eyes. Harper didn't mind the corporate armor, she simply looked at it as a temporary shell. It's not a transition, Harper. It's reality, Elena replied, though the lack of conviction in her voice was apparent to both of them. The Logan executives are staying at the same hotel. From the moment we step out of the terminal, we are on display. Then we'll give them a masterpiece, Harper murmured. She stood up, retrieving her leather bag from the overhead bin with an easy, fluid motion. She stepped aside to let Elena out of the suite, her posture shifting seamlessly into that of a supportive, highly competent colleague. The town car arranged by the agency was waiting for them outside the baggage claim. The drive into the city was a quiet affair, the tires humming against the wet asphalt of the Kennedy Expressway. The Chicago skyline rose in the distance, a dark silhouette against the bruised purple of the evening sky, the lights of the skyscrapers reflecting off the surface of the river as they crossed into the loop. They sat in the backseat, separated by a deliberate, professional distance that felt entirely artificial after the intimacy of the flight. Elena kept her eyes fixed on her tablet, reviewing the guest list for the dinner, while Harper looked out the window, the passing streetlights casting rhythmic shadows across her profile. Yet, beneath the silence, the awareness between them remained absolute. Every slight turn of the vehicle, every minor shift in weight, felt like a silent conversation. The hotel was a historic, high-end boutique property off Michigan Avenue, characterized by dark wood paneling, low vaulted ceilings, and an atmosphere of quiet, old-money discretion. The agency had, true to protocol, booked them separate rooms on the executive floor. "Your rooms are adjacent, ladies," the receptionist said, sliding 2 keycards across the polished marble counter. "Rooms 1412 and 1414. The private dining room for the Logan event is on the 2nd floor, starting at 8 o'clock. Elena took the cards, handing one to Harper without making eye contact. "Thank you. We have precisely 45 minutes to prepare." The elevator ride to the 14th floor was silent, shared with an older couple returning from dinner. When the doors opened, they walked down the heavily carpeted corridor, the sound of their heels swallowed by the thick wall. Elena stopped at the door of 1412, inserting her keycard until the small light flashed green. Harper stopped at 1414, just 3 feet away. She leaned against the doorframe, her leather bag slung over her shoulder, her amber eyes holding a quiet, contemplative wait. 45 minutes, Director, Harper said, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous register that always made Elena's pulse leap. "Don't spend all of it looking at the mirror." "I have a schedule to keep, Ms. Wilde," Elena replied, her hand resting on the brass doorknob. "I know," Harper whispered, a small, knowing smile touching her lips before she turned and entered her own room, the heavy oak door closing with a soft, solid click. Elena stepped into her room, the silence of the space welcoming her. She did not turn on the main lights, preferring the ambient glow of the city filtering through the sheer curtains. She walked to the center of the room and simply stood there for a full minute, her hands resting on the back of a velvet armchair, her breathing deep and uneven. The pool was shifting. It was no longer just a game of professional friction or office flirtation. The stakes had transformed, she was falling into something that defied her capacity for control, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. She forced herself into motion. She turned on the lights in the marble bathroom, the bright illumination bringing her back to the task at hand. For the Logan dinner, She had chosen a modern interpretation of formal wear, an impeccably tailored midnight black velvet tuxedo blazer with silk trousers, paired with a sheer, high-necked lace top beneath. It was a look that commanded respect while retaining a subtle, sharp femininity. She did her hair in a tight, flawless chignon, leaving not a single strand out of place. She applied a dark, precise shade of crimson lipstick, the bold color acting as the final piece of the executive uniform she wore like iron. At exactly 7:50, a quiet, firm knock sounded at the connecting door between the two rooms. Elena froze, her hand pausing as she adjusted her silver watch. She hadn't realized the rooms had a connecting door until that exact moment. She walked over, her heels clicking against the hardwood border of the rug, and unlocked the deadbolt with a slow, deliberate twist. The door swung open. Harper stood in the opening, and for the first time since they met, Elena felt her breath leave her lungs completely. Harper wore a deep emerald green silk slip dress that fell to her ankles, the liquid fabric draping elegantly over the contours of her body. A matching tailored blazer was slung casually over one shoulder, breaking the formality of the look with her trademark effortlessly. Her dark hair was styled in soft, vintage waves that fell past her jawline, and a simple, delicate gold chain rested against the bare skin of her collarbone. She looked radiant, dangerous, and utterly captivating. "You're late, Director," Harper said softly, her amber eyes scanning the sharp lines of Elena's velvet tuxedo with a slow, appreciative focus. "I have 2 minutes," Elena managed to say, her voice remarkably steady despite the sudden erratic rhythm of her heart. Harper stepped across the threshold, entering Elena's room without invitation, closing the connecting door behind her. The fragrance of her perfume, that intoxicating blend of cedarwood and sweet vanilla, instantly filled the space, overwhelming the sterile scent of the hotel room. She walked up to Elena, her movements unhurried, stopping just close enough that the silk of her dress brushed against the velvet of Elena's trousers. She reached out, her fingers hovering for a fraction of a second before she adjusted the lapel of Elena's blazer, straightening the silk satin detail with meticulous care. "The velvet suits you," Harper murmured, her eyes rising to meet Elena's. "It's soft, but it holds its shape. Just like the woman wearing it." Elena looked down at the fingers resting against her chest. She could feel the warmth of Harper's hand through the fabric. "Harper, the executives are downstairs. We cannot walk in looking like this." "Like what?" Harper asked, tilting her head, a soft, teasing spark returning to her eyes. "Like 2 colleagues who are entirely aligned on the strategy." "You know exactly what I mean," Elena whispered, her hands rising instinctively to catch Harper's wrists, her fingers tightening around the slender joints. "The line between what is professional and what is personal is completely gone in this room. But the moment we open that door, we have to find it again." Harper's expression softened, the playful demeanor fading into a deep, unyielding sincerity. She didn't pull her wrists away from Elena's grip. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the final inch of distance until her front was pressed gently against Elena's, the heat of her body radiating through the thin layers of clothing. "I know the line, Elena," Harper said softly, her voice a soothing balm against Elena's anxiety. "I know how to play the game. I've been playing it with you for months. But you need to understand something." She raised one hand, Elena letting her wrist go as Harper's fingers found the delicate gold clasp of the necklace Elena had been struggling to fasten earlier. "You don't have to carry the fear of losing control when you're with me. The world isn't going to fall apart because you let yourself want something." Harper stepped behind her, her fingers cool against the back of Elena's neck as she deftly fastened the small silver chain of the pendant Elena wore. The brief, intimate contact made a shiver run down Elena's spine, her eyes closing involuntarily. When Harper stepped back around to face her, the task was done. She reached down, picking up her emerald blazer and slipping it on, the formal exterior snapping back into place with practiced ease. She extended her arm, offering her elbow to Elena with a brilliant, professional smile. 8 o'clock, Miss Vance, Harper said, her tone perfectly balanced for the corporate stage. Let's go show Logan Holdings why they made the best decision of their fiscal year. Elena stared at her for a beat, a wave of profound, quiet gratitude washing over her. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into fuel. She smoothed the front of her velvet jacket, raised her chin, and slid her arm through Harper's, her fingers resting against the silk of Harper's sleeve. After you, Ms. Wilde, Elena said. They walked out into the corridor together, the door clicking shut behind them, two distinct forces moving in perfect, dangerous synchronization toward the corporate spotlight below.